the title today, very exciting, because I think most of us are feeling this. When Andrew came with this title, I was really like, oh my God, this could not be better. It's amazing, because it's like, I feel a little bit like we are waking up from a nightmare, and we think everything is different, but everything seems to be the same. And many people are just feeling completely different. And yet nothing has completely changed. So that really brings me, I really wanted to know how Andrew explains that. And I wanted from you, Debbie, if that's okay, that you say if it is something like in the planets that could explain that, or you could justify, or just say how is it that everything is so different and yet it doesn't feel like it yet. That's something that I would, if it's okay with you both, to start with this question, would be amazing. Thank you.
After you, Debbie.
Andrew, yes, you posed the question, so you have to answer it first.
Oh, okay. So there's various entry points to this as far as I'm concerned. And I think one of the things I've been talking about for a long time is that most of us live lives and we change the furniture out of the outer world. So we reorganize our lives, and we move houses, and we change cars, and we change jobs, and some people change spouses, we move countries. And we set up a completely different life, and we convince ourselves, and it appears to others, that everything has changed. But of course, nothing has changed, because we've taken ourselves with us. And all of us have grown up in a culture where we have been encouraged to create an identity based on external criteria. We base an identity on external experts and values, and two things have really shaped that more than anything else in the last 100 years. One is science, and the other is religion. And science and religion, both in very different ways, have actually created an external framework and external gurus and teachers that tell us how it is. And I think right now what we need to change more than anything else is how we are in the world and how we relate to the world. And for me, that involves a shift from reliance on the external world, external values, external teachers, and particularly external experts, and to create a shift where we relearn how to listen to ourselves, listen to our intuition, listen to our instinct, listen to our gut. And until we do that, until we fundamentally take back our power, because in living a life reliant on the external authority, we give away a tremendous amount of power, a tremendous amount of responsibility. But by taking that back and learning to listen to our inner wisdom, our gut, our intuition, our instinct, then we begin to live and create a completely different world. And unless and until we do that, for me, nothing has changed.
Yes, well, Andrew, it's interesting, isn't it, talking about science and religion as being the experts, because from an astrological perspective, astrology is really the marrying of both of those things. It is a science and it is an art. It is the changing and it is the unchanging. So I think very visually we can see with astrology these cycles. I mean, the most visible one, of course, is our beloved moon. And we see in that 29-day cycle how almost daily it changes size and shape. And yet the cycle itself is so familiar and unchanging, and yet within it always brings change. It's always in a different sign. It's in a different degree of the sign. It means something different, but it is a very familiar pattern. And so what I feel with astrology, I mean, the moon is such a fast-moving celestial body, and Pluto is the slowest one that we look at in astrology, taking 248 years to complete its whole cycle. But that actually maybe our actual trajectory is not linear anyway, but it's more of a spiral. And therefore, it might seem as if nothing is changing because we keep revisiting the same place. And yet we come at it with a different perception, a different awareness, and sort of incrementally, I think it is baby steps. I mean, of course, we do have the awakening, and in astrological terms, sometimes, we can get planetary alignments that sort of pulse us with this great whoosh of awakening, the adrenaline rush, the great aha, and we seemingly wake up instantly. But then it's like so many things in life about timing is such a mystery, because is timing the actual event, or what about all the lead up to it? Isn't that also something that's going on in the gestation before it comes to our awareness? So yes, what I feel is that we require a bit of patience with ourselves to kind of make this adjustment, because we are really in a very strange place. And yet astrologically, it's not strange. It's just the meeting of two energies. It's literally this year, the meeting of the past and the future. And what I feel is that this has divided people almost into two camps: those that want their old lives back and they want to go back. When can we return to normal? And those that are excited about the future and actually are released from something that they thought they were perfectly happy with, but actually they have been forced with a different awareness to make these adjustments. And a great shift has taken place, an enforced shift in a way through lockdown, and that we emerge from it very differently. And yet there's always resistance. And therefore, I think at the moment we've got sort of like the immovable force meets the what is it? The irresistible object, or it's the other way around, right? And so there's this feeling of great tension as these two things collide, and we're holding these two energies and holding these two spaces. I think all of us are, and yet we tend to side a bit with one or the other. We want the movement, we want the change, or we don't want it. And I notice this threaded through so many conversations at the moment, both inside my work and outside of it, how I think the thing that prevents us from really embracing the change is fear, basically, fear of the change. And yet there is also great fear to staying the same, and such a fear inherent in stagnation, because then that is like a living death. And actually, I think, if anything, what we've been forced into recognizing and realizing, which perfectly encapsulates this Saturn-Uranus energy. Saturn is Chronos and time, and things that stay the same and have a timing to them that you cannot force. And then Uranus is this great rush of epiphany of awareness. But I think really what we're looking at here is the law of impermanence. So in Buddhist religion, perhaps it's summed up perfectly, because impermanence is actually a law. So it encapsulates Saturn and it's impermanent. So therefore it embraces Uranus and the new. And I think if we can just honestly align with that sense, then we can release ourselves from a lot of the fear that's attached, and to see and to actually accept that this is the stuff of life, this impermanent state. And therefore, it's an illusion to think that everything stays the same. It hasn't. And also, again, as you were saying, we're so externally oriented. We think if it hasn't changed by something that we can see in our five senses or whatever, then actually it's not happening. When actually all of this change starts from within. It's invisible. And I think the enforced lockdown and the virus itself, which is an invisible but hugely powerful force, has taught us to start to respect the invisible, the tiny forces that are larger than us. And so it's a great threat to the ego. It's kind of bigger than us, this invisible thing. We've had to take stock of the power of the invisible, which for me feels like really quite a good thing. I'm sure you agree.
There is just something that comes to me is generally human being in a lifetime, they have this free will to either, connect with this inner voice, the intuition that Andrew very often speaks about, or not. And it takes sometimes a lifetime to reach a stage. And many people on this call do the work. There is some work to do. It's gradual. We don't just happen to just say, oh, here it is, I found it, and I'm going to trust it. It's not like a button. And I think with COVID, we kind of all have been forced to hurry up a little bit and just, do it. Like, again, like Andrew was saying earlier. And I'm just curious to know if you've noticed, both of you in your work with your clients, if there are specific people that are more resistant than others. And if they are, why? What's their characteristic? I know you spoke about fear, and it's probably one of the main common reason for everyone to be resisting what's new and what's coming. Is there anything else that you can talk about? So if people are feeling it, maybe they can recognize themselves, and sometimes awareness is enough to make a change.
Yes. Well, in astrological terms, it's the fixed signs, and the fixed signs actually are Leo, Aquarius, Taurus, and Scorpio, that will only really like change if they have change on their own terms. I mean, Aquarius likes to be the innovator, but that's because they are making this innovation happen themselves, and therefore they have control. It's about control. I think, the earth signs are also very attached to solidity, stability, security. So these signs are Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, and they do tend to get very stuck in to what they know. Taurus in particular sort of avidly avoids change. And the great irony at the moment is that the planet Uranus is spending 7 years in the sign of Taurus and forcing Taurians to kind of wake up to change and liberating them. And I mean, there are probably people on this call, in fact, I know there are, that can vouch for this, the amazing release from themselves. That's really what it is. We can say it's a release from a routine or from an object or a way of life, but actually it's a release from yourself. It's a release from the way you used to think. And, there are, the fire signs, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, of course, love and adventure. So they're a bit more up for the idea of change. They particularly, though, detested lockdown because they are very active. And all of their energy patterning, their energy blueprint is invested in what they can do in a day. So if there's less that they can do, they feel like they're not alive. So I think it was particularly challenging. Whereas the water signs, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, have a very rich inner life. So they tended to do better because a lot of their world is internal anyway. And the air signs, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, are also in their heads a lot. And they have so much to sort of entertain them in their minds that they don't necessarily need the material world to supply their needs, because they can magic up a whole realm of wonderful interactions in their head, almost in the world of ideas. So I think, just in a very basic sense, just tuning into what element you are helps you to understand the building blocks of your reality. We all have slightly different versions of realities and different things that make us feel secure or insecure. It's not one size fits all. So from an astrological perspective, I definitely think that it was more challenging, this lockdown, for some people than others. Yeah.
I think from my point of view, Lara, the Debbie just said it, that we all have a different view of reality, what we call reality, and we communicate and operate as if there is something called reality. There is one reality. But of course, as Debbie's just said, we all have our own filter and our own projector. We know that we experience reality differently. And even from one day to another, we all know one day we wake up and we're restless and we're conflicted and we're a bit grumpy. And the next day we can wake up and we're relaxed and we're joyful. And the external reality is the same every day. And the difference is in the inner reality. It's in the perception. And really, that's what I think we're being asked to shift. That's what we're being asked to. If we shift the inner dial, if we shift the inner perception, then it changes everything. As sometimes, certainly I've experienced within the same 24-hour period, you shift the inner dial and life is completely different. And it's learning how the inner reality creates the outer reality that is going to change the biggest shift of all. Because, we can change the external circumstances, and many people in the world are preoccupied with that. But if you don't change the inner dial, you'll just recreate it in a different way.
Yes, that's so true. But I think it's such hard work, isn't it, to shift the inner dial? That's the thing.
Yeah.
Whether people are willing to really go there, it's so much easier to just look externally and to blame the outside world for what's happening or not happening.
It's also even when you're aware that you don't want to blame the external world. It's just, I'm speaking for me here and people that I speak to regularly that report that they feel the same. It's because since we were born, this is what we are trained to do for some odd reason. Yeah. And I'm sure there was people, like I'm 53 years ago, there was people like Andrew, like yourself, who was teaching this. And yet, all we had was we have been told that we have to either push or pull. I've never heard in my life the word acceptance before this 5 years of my trying to make sense of it all and be, reconnected with myself. And there isn't acceptance in my childhood. And as I was growing up was for, sorry if the term is very simplistic, but for losers, like, you accept things if you're weak. If you don't accept, otherwise you keep pushing or pulling or fighting And now it's like we are suddenly, for me, and please, if anyone would like to share or just ask a question, for me, it's like we are in a world suddenly where we speak a totally different language, and we just have to learn it and speak it. And I think the resistance sometimes may not just be a resistance, but a proper difficulty in practicing it. I don't know if that is also astrologically something that is planned for our planet to be entering an era where humans change the way they feel or they are.
Yes. Well, that's an interesting point, Laura, because actually in the middle of this lockdown at the end of last year, in fact, on winter solstice, there was the most stunning lineup of Jupiter and Saturn in the heavens. I don't know if any of you managed to see it, but it really was stunningly beautiful and visible to the naked eye. And actually, what was very important about this, although Jupiter and Saturn do get together astronomically every 20 years in their conjunction, it's called. But this time around, they were changing element out of a 200-year period in the earth signs, where they're very much generating this whole era of materialism, industrialization, and consumerism. And now they're moving into the air signs. So there's a sense here of ideas of humanity. And the last time that this great mutation happened actually was the beginning of the Renaissance, the period of the Renaissance. So I do see it as a collective wake up. And for this reason, I feel actually optimistic about humanity, because I really think that probably if we were in the Renaissance, it's not as if, one day we all woke up and, hey, we're in the Renaissance, but they were like little sparks of light that switched on gradually at the beginning over a period of time. And I think that's where we are. So I think the conversations, to bring it back to what you're talking about, Laura, and this new language, it is a kind of new Renaissance, and that we're starting to connect in different ways, and that this will gather momentum and bring about a big turning point in consciousness, I think, for humanity.
Andrew, do you feel also with the part of the work you do is also, again, simplistically saying you wake up people or reconnect or help them reconnect to their soul or their higher self or whatever you call it?
I think, as Debbie said very early on, it's all about cycles. And it's interesting she just mentioned the Renaissance, because I think that, there's always been communities. You talk, Lara, about not being taught this stuff in schools, and I wasn't taught this stuff in schools or in my family of origin. But there are communities for 5,000 years who've lived in conjunction with the planet and have understood a very different relationship between the inner and outer world. And they wake up every morning and they talk about their dreams, and they live in a different way. And what we've done over the last several hundred years is we've labeled them primitive, and we've labeled ourselves civilized, and we set down a course which was based on external metrics. So both science and religion were concerned with religion separated the creator from creation. So God was outside creation. And suddenly there was a schism between divinity and the material world. And science did a similar thing in terms of the observer was dissecting and explaining the material world. And that's very different to how people used to live. And we're now turning back to understanding that actually we are part of creation. And, our bodies are whatever percentage water they are, and we're affected by the oceans, and we're affected by the moon, and we're part of that system. We're a living, breathing organism. But we haven't been taught in that way. We haven't been educated in that way. We haven't been conditioned in that way. So, of course, it is difficult to collectively get back to that way of being in the world. But unless we do, that the pathway that we're on is, we know intuitively, is leading to the destruction of the species, the destruction of the planet, the destruction of the species. And we kind of know that intuitively, and yet it's very difficult to change direction. And for me, even if we suddenly, repaired the ozone layer, we rebuilt the ice packs, we replanted the rainforests, if we do all that in the outer world, and yet we still live dependent upon outer metrics, nothing will have changed, because we'll just repeat the cycle. The change that we're looking for is this shift from the outer measurement, the outer reality, to learning to live from our inner wisdom. We have inner guidance every day of our lives, and we tend to overrule it. And we need to relearn that.
There are some decisions in life sometimes you take in general, just because we learned to listen to ourselves and this instinct. And it is not very highly regarded in our society. Anyway, I'm personally speaking for myself. I'm surrounded by people who just don't acknowledge this. Like if you take a major decision in your life and your reasons are just because I feel it this way, it's nearly ridiculed, so do you think that's very personal? Do you think we just get used to it, or it's a question of confidence, like you grow this confidence over time and then maybe more people will be like that? Or not that I'm saying I'm a pioneer of anything, but I'm just saying that sometimes it happens that, especially in the last year, many decisions I've taken were only based on my inner instinct, not on science, not on smarter people that have spoken about it, and it feels very uncomfortable at times.
Well, I don't know about you, Debbie, but I mean, it sounds a little bit controversial, although it's not controversial to me at all. That I had a conversation a couple of days ago with somebody that was talking about altered states of consciousness and certain drug-induced states. And they said to me, what do you think is the strongest altered state of consciousness that you can access at the moment? And I thought about it and I said, well, for me, it's what we call normal waking life, that effective hypnosis, the way people go about their life, it is so deluded, it's so hypnotic, and it's so seductive. It pulls us in a little bit like a magnetic force. And, pre-COVID, every day you had 3 million people walk across London Bridge and they go into cubbyholes and they press keys and they rearrange the financial structure of the world. And the more, we're going to look back on this and the way people have reacted, I think, over the last 18 months, putting 85% of the world's population under house arrest. We've created fascist states where we're still living in a fascist state to a large degree. And I know that sounds very sort of, I'm not really an activist and I don't, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but there's a lot of madness in the external world. And I think we have created these two very different worlds. And for me personally, you asked the question, I don't try to engage with that external world or create a lot of debate about it, because I think there are too many levels of madness in it. I really genuinely do. I think it's about getting on with a life quietly, planting some vegetables and doing what you do, learning to listen inside to what your body is telling you.
Yeah. And try to not create more divide, basically, by doing what you've just said.
How does that look astrologically, Debbie, in terms of these? Because in a way, I think there's this, we've been through these couple of 100 years of materialism, but I think there's a soul sickness. I think people are disenfranchised from their, whether you call it soul or psyche, and there's this longing for something that is more satisfying.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think that because the sign of Pisces, which is the final sign of the zodiac and the one which embraces all of our human condition and experiences in a way, sort of been there, seen it, done it kind of thing. We have Jupiter in Pisces at the moment, and in the next couple of years, we're going to have Jupiter passing through here, Saturn passing through here. At the moment, we have Neptune passing through here. So I think there is this great longing, but almost Neptune can be resonant with a sense of grief in a way, and passivity. It's a sort of hopefulness plus hopelessness, but it's sort of like, where do we stand on that spectrum? Because there is a sort of disappointment, and there could be a lot of disappointment with, the patriarchy powers that be, because they have failed us. If we have set such great store by them, great disappointment, and the deception, which is another Neptunian facet of that, the deception on us. And did they really know what they were doing? Either they were inept or they lied to us, one or the other. Well, either is, not a great state of affairs, is it? So I think that whilst Neptune is occupying this space, we're pondering these things very gradually. And a lot of us are, pressing the snooze button over and over again in terms of the really full waking up, because waking up is very painful, and having to take responsibility for your own life. It can be hard work, it can be painful, but then the treasure is, the gift is that it's liberating, it's empowering when you get to that place. But the early stages of it, trying to shed being under this collective hypnosis where, mummy and daddy tell us what to do, and, then it's their fault if it goes wrong. Trying to, actually own and take responsibility for ourselves is a big deal, and a long drawn out deal as well. It doesn't happen overnight. But I think that's where we're going collectively. And I feel that, there is a kind of redemption in that, in a way, a kind of salvation in that, a kind of grace in that as well. And that, I think the more we hang on to thinking that, this old structure is still standing. I mean, look at that building in Miami that collapsed. I mean, when I saw that just fall apart and disintegrate a couple of months ago, I mean, that also is a great visual image of something that looks so permanent and so solid. And then it's just razed to the ground, really, in an instant. So these are visual images almost of our times, designed to help us realize that it is an illusion, this solidity and this projection of everything to the external world, and that we need to see everything as far more fluid. So, there's a lot going on, I think, within us all as we sort of gradually come to realize. Yeah.
I think Debbie makes a really good point there about, we talk a lot about connecting more with ourselves and listening to our inner voice and being more tuned. And one of the consequences of doing that is we get in touch with some inner heartbreak, some inner hurt, some inner grievances. There's a whole past scenario, which often is multi-generational, that if we want to be more in touch with who we are, we need to encounter and befriend those places, and we see it very, very clearly in the collective. The way the collective has been living has consequences, and you're seeing in the collective all these issues bubbling up around race and slavery and gender, all of which it's an important voice to connect with. And how we manage that voice and how we communicate that is a different issue. But there's no escaping that the way we've been living has had very damaging and violent consequences on ourselves and a lot of other people. And we've got to come to terms with that. Part of being more attuned to ourselves is to come to terms with that. And it's exactly the same. The collective mirrors the individual and vice versa. It's the same story. And in 12-step groups, which is just one phenomena that's arisen over the last little while, that there's a whole process in which individuals look at their past and they take inventory and then they make amends. And Debbie mentioned these two sides of the hurt and then the redemption. You can't really have redemption or salvation or grace without opening up the wound and looking at the damage that's been done. And some people don't want to do that.
I'd like to leave opportunity to some people if they want to ask you questions, if maybe while they type it, or let me know if they want to ask it directly. There is one question, Debbie, I'd like to ask you. I was really fascinated by your book. I just want to show everyone your book. I'll write it in the chat anyway. But one thing that I've always really wondered, I don't know if I have twin girls. And they're born 1 minute apart. And they're born in the same family, same day, same city, same everything, 1 minute apart. And I promise you, Victoria is on this call and she can confirm that they couldn't be more different people in the world. Like, forget sisters, they have nothing, forget twins. They don't even look or act or sound like sisters. And I think in your book, tell me if I'm distorting that, but I'm sorry if I am, but correct me. I think I understood that basically there is a lot to do with your something called north and south nodes that are related basically to a past life, and it's the current. Can you talk a little bit more about this?
Yes. Well, we all have this in our chart, the nodal axis, north node and south node, which reveals a lot of our soul journey in the chart. So that's what I'm particularly interested in. My kind of astrology is not about the prediction or the personality level, but kind of a slightly deeper look at what's going on underneath. So with the north node, it's what we're here in terms of our purpose to do and to experience and to learn about in this life. And the south node, which is opposite to that point, in that sign, say we have the north node in Libra, we're learning how to collaborate and cooperate and to be graceful. And yet we're coming with the south node in Aries, where we've accumulated this warrior spirit and we're naturally very independent and go-getting, and we think we can do everything all by ourselves. So we're pulled between this polarity. So I think this is just a very interesting way to look at your chart, and one of the first things to look at is, where you're going to and where you're coming from. And then when you realize other people's charts connect with yours, if they connect on those node points, then this is a real soul connection between the two of you. It's where we get our mentors and that feeling of deja vu, or that we feel that person is so familiar just as we meet them. And I see it repeated over and over again in families and partnerships and friendships and business colleagues even. But these things are repeated and connected. But to answer your point a little bit more about your twins, Lara, twins are really interesting because this is the mythology of Castor and Pollux. And I really feel that, this is also reflected in the chart, because as we're talking about this consciousness, the chart itself is the potential for our consciousness, and it's almost impossible to inhabit all areas of our chart and to know ourselves absolutely and fully, because if we did, we'd all be enlightened beings. We wouldn't even need to be here. So we're working towards that. And so there are areas where we have our blind spots and we're in denial, or we don't inhabit that part. So we work through areas of our chart. And I think with twins, and actually I've not only worked with twins, but I've worked with quadruplets, which is fascinating for me. 4 people all born within 20 minutes, right? And they're now age 40. And there's this sense that they're all very different, and some of them don't even like each other very much. They're really, really different. And yet that I can see as an outsider the themes that are there. And I think what happens with twins, and probably more with quadruplets, if I hold up a chart, you see it's divided into sections. It's almost like, it's a 360-degree circle. It's a bit like a piece of cake. So with twins, they kind of, they choose, I'll take this slice and this slice and live this out. You can have that bit and that bit. With quads, obviously, there are smaller divisions of the cake cut into 4. But I think that's what happens, is that, there's a kind of unconscious agreement that one twin gets to live out one side of the chart and the other twin gets to live out the other bit. I think that's what goes on in my experience.
It makes sense, actually. It really makes sense. As I don't see a question coming, I'm being very selfish. I'm just asking them myself. If you want to step in, I hope the chat is working. People are very quiet today, so I'll just continue. I'm curious to know if there was anything in the planets and the stars that led you to see what we just lived the last year and a half. And if it did and you didn't tell us, I'm going to be very upset with you.
It's all Debbie's fault.
It is. You can all blame me. I'll be the collective scapegoat. Yeah, well, you could see it. I could see it. Could see it years in advance. Like I remember looking at it in about 2016, looking at this lineup in January of 2020, with this very unusual lineup in Capricorn of Saturn and Pluto and Ceres and Mercury. But it's the Saturn and Pluto that were the sort of big things that are very much about this great turning point in the power structure, the anxiety in the collective. And for me, this one word came up, fear, because we didn't know exactly how it was going to translate, whether it was going to be a war or an illness or what. But I knew it was global. I knew that everybody would be connected and everybody would be required to make this shift. But, Saturn and Pluto are all about devastation in a way. Pluto is the planet of sort of death and rebirth. And, this has been, in quite literal terms, a lot of death, and also to trying to rebuild society, the collapse of businesses, the collapse of life as we know it. And Saturn is about restriction and about control. So I think looking at that, and so it came to pass. I remember around about Kate Middleton's birthday, there was this eclipse, and there was Megxit, and as a sort of sparkler or spoiler to what was going to happen. This sort of was the dramatic, a big challenge to the royal family, which you could look at as part of the power structure of like, wow, this is all going to blow to pieces. Someone's actually leaving, and what's happening. And then COVID. And, actually, this is it. There's these kinds of big noise waves that happen. It's like the planetary Big Bang, if you like, has a lot of aftershocks and ripple effects. And we are still there, trying to reformulate, trying to see what's left and what we want to have left. So I think it's been a very, obviously, fascinating time for all of us to be alive and to witness this. And we have to kind of think, we all signed up to be here at this time. What's our part in it? What is it that we're supposed to be learning from this great big shift? But it is, there is no going back. That's the way I see it. There is no old life to go back to. I don't mean to sound so dramatic about it, but I think that things really have changed, whether that's inner, whether that's outer, whether it's both. We need to keep on going with this and reaffirming that, we're all here to develop and to keep moving. And the world itself is turning on its axis daily. We're changing. We need to, keep up with this instead of wishing that we could just go back to how things used to be. When actually, if we did rewind, if we listened in on ourselves, we were probably complaining an awful lot.
I think one of the things that occurs to me, Lara, is that we've talked a lot about the impermanence of all things. And the external world, the material world, is by definition constantly changing. It cannot stay the same. And as our friend Heraclitus said in 600 AD, you cannot step into the same river twice. So in that sense, and Debbie's made the point many, many times, everything around us is changing all the time, the planets, the seas, the ocean, everything. But what philosophers and theologians and poets and people have talked about, as long as there's been human beings, that the soul, whether you like the word or not, the soul is not impermanent. The soul doesn't change. And notions like love, I would say, well, love is not impermanent. Love is a constant. We might manifest love in lots of imperfect ways. And so one of the ways we can approach this subject is to actually look at, the things that are not impermanent, things that are not constantly changing, and trying to live from that place. Because there are people who've demonstrated a life lived from love, whatever that might mean, and it's a very different life to the life most people are living, and I think we need to become more soulful. I think that over the last few hundred years, we've moved away from the psyche, from the soul, and yet, every generation there is that debate between the spirit and the material manifestation of that spirit. And so it's just another framework within which we can consider this. And it's really, what are the unchanging elements of life? And how do we root ourselves in the unchanging elements of life more?
Debbie, I'm not sure if you can read Carolyn's question. Thank you, Carolyn. It's
let me see.
Debbie, if you could chat about entering into the age of Aquarian this year and what that highlights for us.
Yes. Well, this relates back to what I was talking about, the Jupiter and Saturn conjunction on the winter solstice, December 2020. I feel was the big, real, true dawning of the age of Aquarius. Of course, everyone's been singing about this since Hare in the 60s, right? So there is no, just as I was saying for the Renaissance, there's no absolute tipping point that we get to the age of Aquarius. And the reason for that is because the Earth has a wobble on its axis, and we have this thing, the precession of the equinoxes. And therefore, we're within a time frame of about 200 years at which at any point we could enter the age of Aquarius. But for me and for many astrologers, we feel that because of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius itself, that we could demarcate this. And I feel that, we are moving in this. This is for sure that we've moved into this great mutation of the next 800 years, the next 200 years of which is all air sign energy. And this feeling of moving out of greed, really, to thinking about the connection of humanity, to thinking of, how to innovate. And actually, Aquarius, talking about this innovation, I mean, the last time that Saturn was in Aquarius was the beginning of the World Wide Web. If you think about that, I mean, that's actually fairly recently. I mean, but it has changed everything. So now we've got AI, whether we like these things or not, but, things are going to just move on apace because Aquarius is the innovator. So we're moving into these great technological advances, and therefore we, I think, could expect to see great advancements in terms of solutions to health issues. But, we're really looking at the way we think. And Aquarius is a sign that thinks outside of the box and doesn't think about themselves so much as the good of all. So it is a humanitarian sign. So therefore, I think the balance of power from the ego is moving away from the ego now and into thinking about our connection, thinking about our tribe, our team, our community, living more locally but connected, this kind of thing. So it's a very exciting time. Aquarius is one of, the most exciting signs of all, where anything could happen. And, this is why I feel quite positive. And there is this feeling of, the movements happening quickly and people getting together to discuss things and people thinking more. This is about, how we think. So it's not just, being involved in the work and the daily grind, but actually moving up a gear upgrading our awareness, so that, we can start to connect more fully and discuss, negotiate, navigate these times.
My forever favorite thing to ask Andrew is if he has tips for me to what to do, not to panic, not to fall back, not to drive him mad with this. But there are things sometimes that, we could just do. Is astrologically, is there something that you recommend to sail through, this period that's coming in a smoother way? Or
well, one of the things that I find my clients love is this mini meditation I do with them, which I won't do for you completely now, but I can say to you that I think one of our biggest problems is that we set so much store by what's going on, what I call horizontally in life. In other words, what is all surrounding us, what's going on out there. And that if we shift our awareness, and this is called the L shift, so we stop thinking horizontally and we allow everything horizontal to kind of unhook from us. And then we do this vertical alignment. The vertical alignment, every time I take a client through that, there is just this great smile that breaks out on their faces, because the vertical alignment connects you to source energy. Yes, it's the cosmos, it's your higher self or whatever, but it's kind of like connecting up to the meaning, the purpose that lies beyond all of this stuff that is bothering us on the horizontal plane. So I would say that this is a fantastic little reminder that we can do for ourselves anywhere, whether we're sitting on the tube, whether we're, watching TV or whatever we're doing, just to remind ourselves not to be so attached to everything that's going on the horizontal plane.
What's great is it's the same tip as Andrew always gives me. So that goes...
We're twins.
Yeah. I'm happy.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Debbie. Thank you, Andrew, again for doing this with me. I really, really enjoy our time together. Debbie, it was so good to see you, to be with you, and to read this book. I thought I knew a bit of astrology because I did my chart, several times, but I can't wait to have mine done with you now soon, hopefully.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me and inviting me. It's really lovely. I love to be part of this group.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. I look forward, Andrew, to discuss with you the next few talks, if you maybe have some ideas or things for September. I know we won't be doing one in August for several reasons, but we'll see you all in September anyway. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Lara, for being the catalyst that brings us all together. It's wonderful. We need to gather more and more. Again, Debbie touched on this community aspect. We need to spend more time together, in a tribe and talking about these things, because we all need support.
Absolutely, yeah. I really feel that support here, and thank you all for that. Love you. See you soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.